So last week I gave my testimony, and I talked about what it meant for me to come to know God as a man who was, an atheist, or at least very, very against the idea of God. And I said to you that prayer had a lot to do with me coming to know God, and that my grandmother prayed, but what was the process? What was it she was actually accomplishing with prayer, and what was God doing? I'm going to get a little deep here, and I'm going to try to make sure that I don't get too deep or chase too many rabbits. But I'm a philosopher. I'm a theologian. I think pretty deeply, and what I know about people and what I know about the way people think is that everybody on earth, and this is not just within my philosophy. This is something that people have studied. Within every person on earth, we exist and we move with biases. Inside of our head, we have ideas about what is true and what is not true. In the study of apologetics, which is the branch of philosophy and theology that defends the faith, that helps convince people that Jesus was real and that he was a historical figure. In apologetics, we talk about how people have a priori or subjective ideas. These are truisms. These are biases that we all live with. When you live this world, an anthropologist will say that you have a worldview. You have a way of looking at the world that you have constructed, that these things are true and these things are not true. And everybody does this. We call them presuppositions. And these presuppositions are part of how you deal with the world. You can't live without them. I had an argument once with an engineer, and he said that he doesn't believe in anything. He has no beliefs whatsoever. He only has facts. And I had to convince him that every human being has beliefs. You couldn't function without them. And they filter your facts. I mean, all of you have experienced this on Facebook. Some facts that you hold to be absolutely true, another person just can't accept them. They are untrue. Look at, and I hate to bring this up really, but what people call the Trump derangement syndrome. I would argue that there's also another one. There's the AOC derangement syndrome. There's always somebody in politics that you just can't stand. And no matter what they say, they're wrong. You have just decided that if they say the sky is blue, therefore the sky is not blue. Done. You're finished. We all have these biases. Some of them are worse than others. Some of them are derangements and anger. But you have them. You don't always examine them. For example, the engineer has the bias or the presupposition that mathematics is true. And he uses those mathematics, and he should. Pragmatically, they are true. Prove it. The science philosopher, the philosopher of mathematics, will tell you that mathematics is good. Mathematics pragmatically is good. It's probably true, but you can't prove it. Where does the number 7 come from in the universe? What proves that number 7 exists? These are a prioris in Latin. In English, we just say presuppositions. And you exist in presuppositions. You see this in crime dramas. You see this in courtroom dramas. You see this in the real courtroom. When a person has made up their mind about something, and they've taken a presupposition that something is either true or not true, all of the facts, all of the arguments, all of the ideas are filtered through those presuppositions. Let me give you an easy example. A man decides, a woman decides there are no miracles. And that's their worldview. That's how their worldview is constructed. Miracles do not exist. Present them with a miracle. What do? They deny it. It's a coincidence. It's a fluke. It's not a miracle. It's just how you're interpreting it. And no amount of evidence is going to convince them of that. You just can't. And so you come to them with the idea of God, and they've decided there's no miracles. Miracles do not exist. And any evidence of God's existence that relies upon a piece of fact that's a miracle is automatically dismissed. It doesn't matter how well you present it. It doesn't matter how well you show the evidence. That's just the way it is. We see this in science. We see this in the way that the population accepts science. First of all, for example, a person that denies climate change. Doesn't matter how much evidence you show them of climate change, it's not right. It's corrupted. It's falsified. It's false news. They just don't accept it. And vice versa, the person that believes in climate change as a human man-made event, you present them with the fraud that some scientists have presented, and yet they deny it. The facts are in. Facts and arguments are only as good as we allow them to be with our presuppositions. Deny that all you want. It is part of human psychology. It is part of human sociology. It is documented. It is well known. And so I meet people all the time. Their primary a priori presupposition is there are no miracles. And so you present them with the message of Jesus Christ. That Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins, and he rose from the dead. And rising from the dead, he gives us the victory over death, and he gives us the victory over sin. And automatically that person says, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Because his worldview, his construction of the universe, starts with, there are no miracles. And the evidence just will not convince him. Apologetics, my field of study, spends much time in the history, much time in the text. We are actually more sure, scientifically, historically, all the rules of science and history study, we are more sure about the texts of the Bible than we are about whether or not Shakespeare's texts are accurate. Shakespeare's texts are only 300 years old. We're more sure about the Bible, believe it or not, than we are about whether or not Caesar had wars in France with the Gauls. Textually, we are more sure, but yet we don't teach the Bible as history. We don't teach the Bible as history, even though it fits the bill. Yet we do teach the wars in Gaul with Caesar as history, even though his texts are less accurate. Because we have this worldview. We have this a priori. We have this presupposition. Caesar was a real person and Jesus wasn't. And people just take the evidence differently because of that. Whether it's science, history, textual criticism, people come to God with the presupposition that he doesn't exist or that miracles cannot happen. And when we show the evidence or we present the philosophical or logical argument for his existence, when Robert Jastrow writes a book, God and the Astronomers, proving his points all along the way, many people just look at the facts and say, dismissed. My worldview says they don't exist, and therefore they don't. So as my grandmother was praying for me, and as I was trying to search out what my worldviews were as a young man, and finally coming to decide that I needed to figure out if this God was real or not, my presuppositions were, God's not real. So all the facts and the arguments just went in one ear and out the other, that they clearly are flawed, they're clearly wrong, I can't accept them. What do I do? Well, I have to attack my presuppositions. And I'm not going to do that. Somebody else is going to have to do that. And I told you about the man in the church who came and just treated me as an equal and explained. And that was a start, but still, even then, my presuppositions were telling me he's just an old man who grew up in the church. And here's one of the most famous arguments that atheists use. You only believe in God because you grew up in a world where people told you there was a God. They don't realize that logical equivalence says that I can go back and say, you only don't believe in a God because you grew up in a world where people told you there wasn't one. Double-edged sword. What's it take for me to encounter this God and believe in him when I start with the presupposition that there isn't one and there's no miracles. I deal with this often. I deal with preachers, believe it or not. Men who are pastors of churches, women who are pastors of churches, who have come to me and said, there's no miracles. The Bible's just a bunch of fairy tales. I said, then why do you read it? Why do you preach it? Why do you pastor a church? And their answer is, well, we teach Aesop's fables to children, and the fables have a moral story that's true, even though the story's not true, and that's good enough. If you approach the Bible with Jesus being just a fairy tale figure, you will never encounter this God of power. And as I've said before, if you're looking for a God that has enough power to change the universe, to heal you, to bring you into salvation, then you're looking for a God that actually has power that can frighten you and hurt you and damage you and change you and make you different. And that kind of power is dangerous. And fables and morals and good stories don't have that kind of power. I'm not saying they don't have power. They don't have that kind of power. So how then does Michael Haggard, who denies the existence of miracles at that time, denies the existence of a conscious, powerful, personal, meaning having a personality, God, how do I get there? How do I encounter this God? My presuppositions have to be destroyed. And that's no easy thing. I can, as a human being, understand that I have presuppositions and biases and derangement for things I don't like. I can deny evidence that's as clear as a bell because my presuppositions say that I can't accept those. So that's a difficult job, especially when you're doing it by yourself. And sometimes it's impossible because we can't see our own presuppositions. Our presuppositions, according to philosophy and logic and psychology, our presuppositions are so firmly built within us, they help us get through the universe. They help us get through the night. We use these things so that we can figure out how things are. Even when our presuppositions are wrong, they work to help us function in this world. Otherwise, we would never accept anything as true or possible or, well, I'm getting too deep here. I come to Jesus Christ. I come to God as a young man saying, there are no miracles. There is no personal, conscious, caring God. There's just some force out there, maybe. How does Michael Haggard finally come to believe in God? The prayer helps, and through prayer, the Paraclete, the Father, and the Son start working on my presuppositions. They start defeating my presuppositions on a level that is not psychological, it's spiritual. Jesus says, no one comes unless the Father draws him. I had an interesting conversation on the train one day when I was a conductor, and the engineer found out I was a pastor. The brakeman told him, and the engineer wanted to shock me and get into an argument about God, and he hated God. He hated the whole concept of Christianity and God, and he says to me once, well, try to convert me. And I said, I'm not gonna. I kind of surprised him. No, preach to me. Tell me what it is this God wants of me. And I said, no, I'm not interested in doing that. He said, why? What's wrong with you? And I said, well, I'm pretty sure God doesn't want you. I can be a little ornery sometimes. He looked at me funny for a while, and the whole train was kind of quiet. There were 3 of us on the head because it was a job that needed a brakeman. And the brakeman was kind of shocked, and the engineer was kind of shocked. And after a few minutes of very awkward silence, the engineer looked at me and said, why? What's wrong with me? I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with you, but I just don't think God wants you. And he was silent for a little while longer. And finally he says to me, you're going to have to explain that one because I've never heard a preacher say anything like that before. I said to him, the Bible clearly says that no one comes to God unless he's drawn. Clearly, God is not drawing you. The logical conclusion is he doesn't want you. It took about 30 minutes before he asked me another question, but the conversation finally ended with the idea that, look, If all you're here to do is argue about God, I don't have time for that. If all you're here is to deny God and make a Christian look like an idiot, clearly you're not serious about this. I'm not going to waste my time. And that honesty turned into a 45-minute Bible study with a guy. You see, I had to attack his presuppositions. God attacked my presuppositions. He attacked the entire idea that I had to start with the idea there's no miracles or there's no God, and he had to attack that. And this is where my grandmother's prayer did the most work, and where your prayer for the lost is going to do the most work, to attack the presuppositions that say, oh, the Bible isn't true. Well, why don't you think the Bible's true? Oh, because I saw a Discovery Channel show that said the Bible wasn't true. Well, what did they say about the Bible? Oh, that the Bible has all these contradictions. Oh, I hear this all the time from people. The Bible is full of contradictions, so I can't believe it. Shakespeare, the original text, full of contradictions. Matter of fact, it has far more than the Bible does. The history of Julius Caesar's wars in Gaul, full. All the manuscripts we have, full of contradictions. Copying contradictions like you wouldn't believe. The Bible, however, if you go and actually study scholarly works about the contradictions in the Bible, and I'm honest, there are contradictions in the Bible. I'm not saying there's not. But when you go to true scholarly work, and some of them are not Christians who do this work, they just got to get a good grade. There's only about 25 contradictions in the Bible, in the original texts, that are understandable as copying errors. And every single contradiction in the Bible, from a historical, scientific study of the text, every single one of them are insignificant. They do not change the meaning of the text. They only have numerical differences or location differences. And they are the kind of thing that a detective, if he was investigating an actual murder, for example, he would expect the witnesses to have slight differences in their testimony. If they were perfect testimonies, he would actually doubt the veracity of their testimony, that they talked together. The Bible has about 20 documented contradictions that can be placed in simple copying errors that do not change the meaning of the passage. And yet in Shakespeare alone, there are 300 copying errors that change, in some cases, majorly change the meaning of the story. And it's a much younger text, and yet no one argues. We come to the Bible with a bias. We come to the Bible sometimes with this historical, populist bias that it's too old, it's been translated too many times. Good grief, that is the stupidest argument. Do you know how many people have been translating and studying the Bible for 2,000 years? How many scholars who don't like the Bible, but they're trying to get a good grade in class by translation and interpretation, or they're trying to make the name for themselves? Even the most famous modern guy, Bart Ehrman, who writes books about all the errors in the Bible, he does good work, and he always comes out saying the truth, and he'll admit the Bible's accurate. He just doesn't like the interpretation. The Bible's trustworthy on a historical and scientific level, but we come to it with these presuppositions. Oh, I saw on TV once that it's full of contradiction, it's been translated too many times. I heard somewhere that there's hidden books of the Bible. That's no secret. Scholars have been telling us about the books of the Bible we don't put in there, and we know why they're not in there. They're lies. They're forgeries from the Middle Ages. There's no secret to this. How do we get past these biases? How do we get past these a priori presuppositions that tell us, oh, it can't be true because I saw it on TV, or my buddy told me that it's true, or just the very simple, I can't believe in this God, or I can't believe in miracles. And therefore, every argument and every piece of evidence must be wrong somehow. How do we get there? It's actually quite simple. And it's going to sound so simple that you're going to think it's stupid. We choose to. We take a moment in time and we choose to believe it's true. Now that sounds foolish, But follow me a bit on this. What started with my cat. This is Mr. Mao. Mr. Mao is a kitty that I met in the backyard of the parsonage here a few years ago. He was a stray cat. He was very scared. And day by day, I warmed up to him, and eventually that day came when I could pick him up. And he's been my kitty ever since. I speak to him in Chinese just because it's funny. And everybody knows that when I go outside calling for Mr. Mao, Mr. Mao needs I naughty. They know I'm looking for my cat. When I first met Mr. Mao, he was scared of people. He didn't want me to touch him. If I came near him, he ran away. But eventually, he noticed that I wasn't trying to hurt him. He noticed that I was trying to be nice to him. And day by day, he came closer until that day where he let me touch him. And now I can't stop. He's very demanding. He jumps up in my lap. He drools, he rubs, and he tries to make sure that he knows, or that I know that he really, really wants me to hold him. This is how we encounter God. We make a choice to take the risk, to trust this different entity that's trying to reach out to us, that's trying to give us comfort, even though we're very terrified by the power and the vehicles and the fire and the electricity and the house and the things that this being controls. But we finally make the choice. Hold me. This is how we come to know the God that loves us. There's so much more to the relationship now because the cat has accepted me. He's come to trust me. The cat's terrified of getting in the car, absolutely terrified. And yet, when my hands pick him up, I can put him in the car. He hates the veterinarian. The veterinarian causes pain. There are things missing now because we've gone to the veterinarian. He knows that a trip to the veterinarian is not going to be pleasant, but yet my hands can hand him over to the veterinarian and he goes. Why is that? Because he's learned he can trust me. That when Michael hands him over to the pain, there must be a reason. Because Michael's trustworthy. Oh, he's quite happy when I take him home. When I clip his nails. When I take a tick off of him. When I pull a sticker out of him. My hands can do it. Because Michael's trustworthy. Why? Because one day the cat decided to take the risk of letting Michael pick him up. And ever since then, Michael has been trustworthy. And now the cat will endure things that he would have never endured before, as long as Michael is the one holding him and taking him and rescuing him. But let's make it a little more down to earth. Think of a courtroom drama. Think of a police procedural situation that you've watched on TV. There's always that time where the detective or the lawyer has just, the jury, they have been convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt in their mind that this person that they're looking at is guilty of a crime. And suddenly every piece of evidence that proves they're guilty is true, and every piece of evidence that says they're not is false. And that's just how they look at it. Until a lawyer or somebody, an investigator, says these words. Just for the sake of argument, let's pretend that this is true. It's something that we use in logic and philosophy to explore the veracity or the truth of some argument. We've already decided maybe it's not true or it just doesn't fit. But then we say, for the sake of the argument, let's assume that it's true. And then we look at all the evidence that way. And suddenly, we might see something different. John Grisham has done this in some of his books where, everybody has said that that person is guilty, all the evidence fits, and then somebody just says, I'm going to take a chance to say that they're not guilty. And now I'm going to look at the evidence differently and see how it plugs into all the situations. I came to finally see Jesus Christ this way. After studying the Buddha, after studying Lao Tzu, after studying Confucius and all these different religious and philosophical leaders throughout history, at some point I just take Jesus, who I've already rejected, and say, okay, for the sake of the argument, let's say everything he said is true. Now, how does the data, how does the information of what he says plug in to the world as I see it, with its brokenness, with its poverty, and with its pain? And suddenly, everything Jesus said kind of fits. Boy, that was hard for me to come to. But just for the sake of argument, is it true? This is how we attack our presuppositions. And this is how prayer attacked my presuppositions. Somebody else's prayer started attacking my presuppositions this way. And for the first time in my life, I just kind of wanted to say, is this true? Let me just plug the data in. And suddenly the data worked, even though I didn't want to accept it. Well, Michael, that seems very humanist. That seems very unspiritual. You're right. Sometimes God, though, has to use a lot of secular stuff to get someone like me to believe him. Let's go back to Scripture then. Let's go back to what Jesus says. Let's make it simpler. In the book of Revelation, Jesus is speaking through John. And John is writing down this wonderful book of encouragement. If you haven't read the book of Revelation as a book of encouragement, you've never really read it. It's not really a book of fear. And John is writing to the churches the words of Jesus Christ as they are fearful that the Roman government is about to destroy them. And Jesus writes this wonderful letter called the book of Revelation to encourage them that God always wins, God always has a plan, God is always in control, no matter how painful this world seems. Jesus is attacking their presuppositions that Rome is the end of the world for them, and it's not. But Jesus says something very special to you today and to me today. If we are searching for God, if we are searching to see if this Jesus Christ is real, and all of our presuppositions say there's no miracles, Jesus couldn't have risen from the dead because people don't rise from the dead, the Bible is just a bunch of fairy tales, and they're good moral stories, and a Christian just is a moral person. Jesus dissuades you from that entirely. In the Old Testament, God says in the Psalms, taste and see that the Lord is good. He's offering you to just take a moment and just taste. In Taiwan, there's a snack that most Americans just can't fathom. It's called stinky tofu or stinky tofu. Chou tofu. You go out in the afternoon or in the evening and you'll be looking for street food, and Taiwan has the best street food. There's TV shows you can watch about it. It's just awesome, good stuff. How do you think I stayed fat in Taiwan? Good food. But as you're walking down the street, night market, weekend market, you'll eventually come across a smell. And it smells like open sewer. I'm not kidding. It's the most awful smell. That's stinky tofu. It's a piece of spongy tofu that's been deep fried, but there's some process that they do that makes it smell horrible. It really is an open sewer. Now, before you get grossed out by the idea that somebody would eat that, remember that even the Europeans have stinky cheese. There's all kinds of cartoons and comedies of somebody taking a chunk of Limburger cheese and holding it up to somebody's face and making them pass out. Yet, Limburger cheese is very popular and people eat it all the time, even though it's stinky. I love chou tofu. I really love stinky tofu now. When I first came across it, I wasn't going to put that in my mouth. Oh my gosh, that smells terrible. I mean, really awful. And yet, a Taiwanese man who is my dear friend, Sam, he said, you got to try it. You just got to hold your nose and try it. And he took me to where the best of the stinky tofu was. Ugh. What horrible stuff to smell. But Michael, you just have to try it. He said to me, there's a Chinese phrase, he said it smells like hell, but tastes like heaven. Well, there's a rousing motivation to try it. So I did. I tried it. It wasn't good the first time because all I could get was the smell. But then I tried it a second time and I started to see what he meant. If you like fried cheese, like fried mozzarella, there is a certain similar quality there. I started to really enjoy stinky tofu. I learned how to kind of close off the smell and just focus on the taste. I changed my presupposition that it was bad into, well, let me taste it and see what the data says. Let me see what the facts say. And it released into my mouth an explosions of flavors that said, this is good. And now here I am in America, kind of craving stinky tofu. I can't get it here. Nobody in America sells it. I'm not even sure it's legal here because it smells so bad. They serve it with kimchi, or what the Chinese call pad thai, spicy cabbage. And oh, my mouth is watering just thinking about it right now. But if you were to smell it, you would say, Michael, you're disgusting. That's the most horrible smell I've ever heard in my life. Because your presupposition is, if it smells that bad, it's not good to eat. Mama told you never to eat anything that smelled like that. Now I crave it. I miss it. I changed my presuppositions. And now the facts fit. What everybody was telling me, it's good. I didn't think it was good. And so I tasted to see if it was good. And this is God's command. This is God's invitation from the Psalms. Taste and see that the Lord is good. At some point, when we are denying the existence of God, when we are denying the existence of the goodness of Christ, when we are saying there is no miracles, the Bible can't be true, God's advice to you is, give it a taste. See if the data, see if the facts don't in fact match every question you have. Take a chance. Just take a chance. For the sake of the argument, this is true for the sake of the argument. And then follow the argument and see where it goes. Need more scripture? Back in Revelation, Jesus. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. Anyone who lets me in, I will come and eat with them. It's amazing how many times Jesus uses food and meals to illustrate his desire to be with us. That's another family thing. Open the door. That's all it takes. Open the door when he knocks, and he's knocking. You see, this God doesn't sit up there waiting for us to come and find him. There's so many stories of Jesus saying he comes and looks for us. And he's looking for us. And he's standing at your door and he's knocking. And you're not answering the door, not because you don't hear the knocking. You're not answering the door because your presupposition is there's nobody knocking. It's all imagination. It's all fairy tale. It's just can't be true. Open the door. At some point in your life, no matter what you believe about miracles, no matter what you believe about this God, just open the door and say, okay, show yourself to me. Come on in. And then start looking at the arguments and the facts that he presents as possibly true. and see how they plug into your worldview, how you've constructed the universe. And you might find that some of your presuppositions were wrong, or at least they didn't work the way you thought they did. And suddenly this Jesus, this God, will become real. Oh, Michael, that's just a mind trick. Well, yeah, it is. You've used it on yourself. You've eaten things that you didn't think were good until suddenly now you crave them. Think of the number of young people who tasted a beer for the first time and thought beer was gross, and now they can't stop drinking beer. You attack your presuppositions. You try it. You just give it a test. Give it a try. Look at the Bible and read it differently for the first time and say, okay, I'm going to accept that there are miracles. I'm going to accept that Jesus could walk on water and Peter could walk on water for a moment, just for the sake of argument, and see how that affects my view of this world. I'm going to accept that Jesus Christ died for me and rose from the dead. For the sake of argument, he rose from the dead. Somebody got raised from the dead. What does that change? And then look at history and say, wow, history did change at that time. Things did change, even though maybe I just don't trust the evidence. For the sake of the argument, I'm going to open the door and I'm going to invite this Jesus in. And I'm going to say, okay, convince me. Because humans haven't convinced me. The Bible hasn't convinced me because my presuppositions say that it just can't be true. So you come in and convince me, and for the sake of the argument, I'm going to believe that you're true. The information will change. The data will change. Your questions will get answers because you've assumed that maybe this is true for the moment. It's not a trick. It's not a mind trick. It's not a lie. If you don't believe me, just look up the whole idea of presuppositional thought in human beings and worldview in anthropology, and how we construct a world with our mind that we think is true, and we filter every piece of evidence through that. Every piece of evidence. And the only way we're ever going to change our mind about anything is to just for a moment assume that I'm wrong about my presupposition. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and whoever lets me in, I will come and eat with them. Eat with Jesus. Listen to him. Accept for just a moment that all his miracles are true. Accept for just a moment that he is right there with you, and watch your presuppositions melt away. So a 16-year-old Michael, 17-year-old Michael, miracles aren't true, God doesn't exist, reads a book by an astronomer who is willing to say, you know, I think there's a God. And so for a moment, I'm willing to say, okay, let's look at the cosmology, let's look at the questions of creation and the Big Bang, just assuming that there is this timeless, uncreated God. And suddenly my world explodes with possibilities, with data that starts to answer the questions that could not be answered when I assumed the data was wrong. Open the door. He's knocking. Open the door and let him in. Eat with him. Listen to him. And just for a moment assume, okay, it's true. Miracles happen. Jesus died, rose from the dead. How does that work? How does that plug into my worldview? How does that answer my questions? You might come away with your biases. You might come away with your presuppositions saying, okay, I tried it and it didn't work. I still think it's all foolishness. I guarantee you, he's going to start working on your presuppositions right then. The Holy Spirit, the Paraclete, is not going to let you go. He is going to keep knocking on the door. He's going to keep bringing you tasty snacks. And he's going to say, taste and see that the Lord is good. My testimony is that first, someone had to pray for me. But the question that someone asked me at the church, how is it you can believe in God? How is it that Michael Haggard can believe in God? The answer is, I had to make a choice. Am I going to live where I am the judge of what is right and wrong and true? Or am I going to accept the idea that my presupposition that I am the center of the universe is wrong? And allow for the fact that there is a God who is King and Lord, and he gets to decide what is true. And so I tasted, took a bite, and I liked it, and I crave it. And now I can't live without it. Open the door, taste and see. The Lord is good.